starting at the beginning, as we probably should, let's begin with, I suppose, initially a quick update on the Stonehenge situation, and how that also relates to some other archaeological sites and conversations happening in the UK at the moment.
Absolutely. Um, New readers start here. The British government agency which builds road infrastructure, basically the Highways Agency, wants to put a dual carriageway and tunnel across the Stonehenge World Heritage Site. It was running a public
Underground,
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 yeah,
yeah,
underground, overground, traffic all free.
yeah.
Um, they want to build this structure across the Stonehenge World Heritage Site to basically eliminate what is claimed to be a traffic bottleneck. And
Hmm.
it's been a long-standing traffic bottleneck on the main route to the West Country. The
The
Highways England,
A303.
the A303,
Hmm. Hmm.
Highways England have just finished a consultation about their plan for the road, which is part of the legal process to get planning permission to build the thing.
Hmm.
It's been extremely controversial. There's a very active group of local people down in Wiltshire who are opposing it, the Stonehenge Alliance. But also the plan, although it's been endorsed so far at least by the National Trust, English Heritage and Historic England, a lot of independent archaeologists have expressed reservations to a greater or lesser extent. And in fact, just a few days ago, ICOMOS UK, which is the International Council on Monuments and Sites, the UK branch of that, published its response to the consultation.
Hmm. Hmm.
The document that they sent to Highways England as part of that feeds into this legal process, and it's actually scathing. Um, as I said, it's a World Heritage Site, and ICOMOS is saying basically that the plan, the tunnel's too short, it doesn't protect the World Heritage Site, they haven't fully considered the archaeology, and I think the most damning comment of all, it says the whole project appears to have been retrofitted into an initial budget driven by road tunnel making and not by an assumption that one of the world's most significant and iconic World Heritage Sites has to be protected.
Rogue tunnel making.
Road,
Oh,
stroke
right,
tunnel
okay,
making.
right.
Sorry.
I just think when you were saying underground,
No,
overground, I was like rogue wombles. Oh, yeah, we'll mate, we'll do it for forever, mate. It's all right. You
I think that I think that given the Wombles were one of the first sort of examples of eco-friendly television, I think the Wombles will probably be lining up with the
Oh,
Stonehenge Alliance on this one.
yeah, Uncle Bulgaria should
But
be
I think
horrified.
the takeaway from this really is that this row isn't going to go away anytime soon. It's divided not just the local communities in Wiltshire, but it's also dividing the archaeological community. And it's very likely that the consultation will come down on the side of the approving the current plan for what's called the short tunnel and dual carriageways.
And of course, this comes in the context of months of stories, and in particular, actually, a while ago now, we covered the comment from UNESCO, where they were very much concerned about the impact that these works and all this conversation might have on Stonehenge and its status as a World Heritage Monument. You mentioned that
And in fact,
status at the beginning.
just to interject there for a second, this ICOMOS letter is independent of the UNESCO report. The UNESCO team were in Wiltshire again a few weeks ago, and there's a new UNESCO report due imminently.
Right, right, yeah. Okay, well, this is an ongoing thing. Obviously, it has an international implication. Stonehenge is, for better or worse, the most famous megalithic monument in the world, and how people deal with this is going to have ramifications for other monuments globally. But this also actually comes in the context of some other ongoing sort of planning archaeology concerns in Britain. So, for example, you brought to my attention a gas holder.
A gas holder,
Yeah.
yes. We're talking industrial archaeology here. Um, it's a gas holder actually just down the road from where I'm sitting talking to you now in southeast London.
Hmm.
It's called East Greenwich Number One. It was once the world's largest gas holder.
Okay.
It's again, a lot of independent experts see it as significant in terms of both the development of the energy industry, but also in terms of the aesthetics of industrial design. It's a very
And
pared back
Uh,
design.
okay, and just for people at home who may not be familiar with what these are, they're
Mm.
essentially giant circular frames in which there is a cylindrical construction that acts almost like an inflatable bladder. It can go up and down depending on the gas pressure inside, and
That's
it's almost
exactly right.
imperceptible it going up and down. I remember there used to be one not that far away from a road that we would drive quite frequently when I was a child, and I'd notice it at different heights, but I never saw it move. If that's me, so it responds to gas pressure and goes up and down. So it's a in some respects it's a mechanism as much as it is a piece of architecture.
That's exactly right. And
Mm.
and in fact, these things used to be in virtually every urban setting because each most towns had their own at least one gasworks
Yeah.
to provide gas for heating and lighting.
Hmm. Hmm.
They developed really from the middle of the 19th century onwards, and the row over East Greenwich Number One is because they're now in the process of being decommissioned because the energy industry delivers gas in different forms now. It comes from offshore, or it comes from liquid gas that's brought from the Middle East. And
And so what is this row then?
what has happened is that the Greenwich Peninsula, where the gas holder East Greenwich Number One is actually situated, is being redeveloped, and it's a massive redevelopment. It's one of the biggest redevelopments in Britain at the moment,
Hmm.
because basically it was one massive brownfield site. It was gasworks and other industrial plant. That has now all gone, and people will be people might be most familiar with the Millennium Dome, which it sits on the end of the Greenwich Peninsula. In fact, just a stone's throw from East Greenwich Number One.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the argument is that SGN, who are the owners of the site, they're a gas distribution company. They are decommissioning their old gas holders. They say they have to demolish it, and they claimed in their submission to the Greenwich planning officers that it was a requirement of future development that the gas holder went.
Hmm.
That's actually not true. And to compound the row, Greenwich Council in November voted to incorporate the gas holder and its heritage value in future plans.
Hmm.
Now, complicating this, Historic England refused to list it, which would have given it statutory protection. And not only that, they actually allowed what's called a certificate of immunity from listing, which basically means that nobody could propose it for listing and have it listed for at least 5 years.
Hmm.
So basically giving the developers a 5-year window of opportunity to get rid of the thing.
And so, so you've got the Stonehenge situation,
Hmm.
this ongoing conversation, and then there's a
Yeah.
third story that we've kind of lumped into this conversation
Mm.
in Northamptonshire, where is it Cotton Henge?
That's right, near Raunds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a monument that was rediscovered. It was already known about, but it was
Absolutely.
rediscovered by developers who wanted to extend a housing estate, I think. No,
And
oh no, sorry,
industrial warehouse.
warehousing. Sorry,
It's
warehousing.
industrial warehousing, yeah. Yeah.
Warehousing development, sorry. And local residents signed off on this, having not been given adequate information, it seems, about this monument in their midst, and now they're particularly annoyed. In particular, here actually, the again, we'll link to all of this stuff below, by the way, if you're curious, people at home. Local residents are frustrated because they feel as though the henge was known about prior to planning application being submitted, but they were not informed that the monument was there. And so somehow, again, this is a situation where the interests of, I suppose, locals, uh, planning law, loopholes, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It gives the impression of being quite messy. And I mean, in the past,
I don't think it's just an impression. I think it actually is, and that's part of the problem.
well, it is. It is. And the thing is, I mean, in the past, we've been accused, I think, unfairly, of being anti-development. You and I, in our conversations, I'm not anti-development at all. I'm simply pro protection where necessary and where there's a good reason for it. But crucially, I'm also pro transparency when it comes to these processes. Uh, what do you think all of this, all these three different stories say, and what do you think? What do you think has to happen then when it comes to the relationship between? Because in the case of Stonehenge, it's national infrastructure, it's that sort of level, highways agency. In the case of, for example, Henge, it's a local interest, and in the case of the gasworks, one might argue it's a niche interest in so much as it's not a classic, archaeological monument, as it were. Um, it is are the bodies that have been put in place adequate, do you think, to act as mediators between those with planning interests, or even those who stand to make money, and the public, or indeed the public interest of these monuments? Or does some new, because I also hate it when governments are overly legislative. I don't think you can, just pass new laws. But what's going wrong here? What can we do to improve these conversations?
I think there's a number of things happening, and it's not an easy situation to deal with and get a handle on, particularly because there are so many legal ramifications. I mean, starting with Stonehenge, the principal argument there is about the World Heritage Site, and the argument, and it's certainly been put forward in the ICOMOS letter, is that the government's responsibilities as custodian of a World Heritage Site aren't being discharged in the plan that Highways England have put forward. And in fact, if the plan that Highways England have put forward goes ahead, ICOMOS and a lot of independent experts say Britain's standing in the World Heritage community will be diminished, because it will have effectively shown that you can lam a motorway across the World Heritage Site anywhere in the world.
Or demolish the pyramids.
Absolutely. Build the Cairo outer ring road by demolishing the pyramids of Cheops.
Yeah.
That's the argument. Obviously, that's exaggerating, but
but also
the point stands.
Well, but also it's interesting though that in that sense, then I imagine there's a related issue here, and that is that the conversation very quickly gets muddied. So there are related links again that we'll put below, where people are concerned about the impact of, say, diggers on farmland in the area. Highways England have been criticised in terms of the use of plant and heavy machinery, and how it's cutting up fields. That is something which is can be mitigated by better practices, laying down planks and this kind of thing for caterpillars and so on and so forth. So this instance, the key issue then, the problem is the legacy of that monument, I guess. But then in the other instances, in terms of conversations, I mean, is this all about I suppose having a better forum for people to register their interests and their concerns?
I think that's the point. If you look at all of these cases, including Stonehenge actually here, it's about who actually owns the past and who actually owns the physical evidence of the past. And does a developer have the right, or a landowner have the right to do away with something, although an elected council, for example, has voted that it should be kept as part of a future development, that future development should acknowledge the past of that particular location. That's the argument in Greenwich. That in fact SGN are being incredibly short-sighted, and Greenwich Council planners have basically blown it, because gas holders like East Greenwich Number 1, there are many, and including award-winning examples of these gas holders being repurposed for things like public open spaces, for apartments, for flats, and so on. So you don't have to just preserve a cast iron framework in aspic. You can actually repurpose it, reuse it, retain its integrity as a monument, but also give it a life in the future.
So something beyond simply calling the estate gas holder estate, if you see what I mean.
Exactly, or that.
The flats, yeah.
Yeah, and preserving it by record, by writing a report about it that gets put in, at best it disappears into the grey literature, and so on. In the case of Raunds, the Henge in Northamptonshire, that's a really interesting one, because it was, as you say, the site was known about, but it doesn't appear to have really entered the public consciousness until the latest development, where although the site was known about, it wasn't scheduled, and there are questions around that which people are asking, because there aren't that many Henges recognised in Northamptonshire at the moment. So although it's not perfectly preserved, it's a significant site in the terms of Northamptonshire.
Hmm.
Now, local people are saying basically it's our henge. We don't want, or at least some local people, people who are protesting about the development, particularly, are saying it's our henge. We don't want it destroyed. It's not an appropriate development to have on that particular site. The professional archaeologists involved are saying, look, the planning process was appropriate. There's a full excavation going on, and everything's worked as it should do. There's no secrecy. It went through a public process. The excavation's happening. It's not just been discovered. It's simply that it's being properly excavated and explored and will be reported. So there you've got, I think, as well as an argument about ownership, there's an issue about communication.
So okay, so one could argue that in the third case, then, and the local residents, at worst, oh no, so at best, weren't given access to information. At worst, weren't, I suppose, provided the tools with which to make inquiries, this kind of thing. But ultimately, again, we're talking about about a forum. We're talking about access to complex discussions, and I suppose, I mean, to put it in simple terms, I guess this is really ultimately what we're getting at: the ability for people to ask questions and register them in ways that will be taken seriously, that doesn't rely upon people being intimately familiar with planning process, relevant legislation, and current thinking on this, that, and the other. It's yeah, it's as you say, it's complicated, but I can't help but wonder whether how long these sort of stories are going to keep on turning up until there has to be some substantial change in how different interest groups are allowed to meet with each other.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that, particularly at the moment, there's huge pressure both to undertake developments to grow the economy and particularly to provide housing.
Hmm.
It's a government aim to provide much more housing than is currently being built. Um, but this is against the background of since 2010, for example, local planning authorities and who deliver planning and development have faced something like the National Audit Office produced a figure a few months ago which suggested those local authority planning departments and delivery departments had been cut by something like 58% since 2010. They've lost over half their capacity when they've got more demands on their work.
And that's capacity to assess, never mind communicate. Yeah.
Precisely. They can barely cope. Anecdotally, you hear that they can barely cope with the workload they're being presented with in terms of just processing the applications and doing the bare minimum that's legally required. Not to be fair to the planners, you also have to say that any protest groups weaponize the environment, the natural environment, the heritage environment to oppose developments. It's how the debate works.
Yeah.
And sometimes those claims might be over-egged to try and to appear to make the conservation case stronger than it actually is.
Well, yeah. So suddenly, a patch in a field that no one knew about becomes a treasured local monument. And,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. In a sense, it's a game that everybody plays. I think that you're right, though. The key point is about transparency, and I think also about trust. And I think the biggest problem we've got at the moment is a breakdown in trust.
Well, yeah, and by that token, in terms of transparency and trust, a forum where all stakeholders and those who are interested in the outcome of a particular case believe that their interests are being listened to and weighed adequately against the interests of others. There is a certain cynicism I've seen in various ways and for various reasons when it comes to local people thinking that, for example, in particular local councils are maybe taking backhanders, or that they have a vested interest in developments going forward. That is, again, that's anecdotal. I'm talking about how people talk to each other, and surely the best way of getting through that is some third way, some extra, maybe some independent forum, but we're not quite there yet on a national level, it seems, or indeed in terms of local instances.
And absolutely, and I'd make one last point while we're talking about this. And I know it's a point I've made before in these conversations, and sadly, I think I'm probably going to end up making again as well. And that is, as well as a breakdown in trust, there is a lack of trust and expectation that the checks and balances that are meant to be provided, that the public believe should be provided by people like Historic England,
or indeed that the legal system demands,
and that the legal system demands. But actually, those checks and balances, for whatever reason, whether it's fear of losing government funding or whatever, aren't being employed, and therefore, from being within the system, from knowledgeable planning officers who know about planning law and heritage significance, or an independent eye on planning from, for example, Historic England, that eye has gone from within the system, and the checks and balances are now being provided by groups outside. And there's an increasing, you see pressure groups, you see increasing use of judicial reviews to review decisions that are taken with full consultation with people like Historic England, Natural England, and the other agencies.
Well, and this is actually, funnily enough, where I absolutely agree with those voices who sometimes comment on these videos, favouring, for example, rampant development, whereby I don't think that, for example, popularism is the way to handle these issues.
No.
It may well be actually that a proper way of looking at the site is to say, well, actually, there's plenty of other examples of this type of building. This one can be demolished. It's okay. Anyway, we have gone over our allotted time on this issue. I thought we would, but it's something which we're bound to return to. This is an ongoing conversation, but it's something which certainly is current in the UK, I think, and also, like it or not, the UK is a litmus test for these sort of cases on a global level. People will point to Stonehenge, for example, and they will say, "Look at what they did. We can do this. We can do that."
Exactly that.
Yeah.